Hello everybody, how's it going? I'm going to plug in the microphone here so you can hear me better. Hello everybody, this is davidTrig and I hope you can see the wall here. Let me know in the chat there if you can see everything okay. I think I'm going to move this way. Maybe that's better, but I'm so glad that you could join me on this Monday morning. I've actually been dealing with a bit of a headache, but I think I'm over it and God's helping me to just have this time with you to talk about how to renew your spiritual power. So make sure that if you are hearing me okay, if you are on the live chat there on Google, that you type in your name, you say hello. You can also share this link with your friends on Twitter, Facebook, wherever. And by the way, if you're here watching this later, not live, right now we're at 12 noon here Pacific in Long Beach, California. Welcome. If you're watching this later this afternoon, maybe after work or in the evening, welcome. I'm so glad that you could join us here on this live chat. So I do these live chats about 3 times a week to give you some of my just learnings in terms of how to find, as it says, spiritual power. And so make sure, as I said, that you just come in and there's a live chat there, and I'm going to try to go back to my computer here sporadically so that I can see any questions that you may have. So feel free to ask questions, to interact with this content, and to most of all just enjoy, to really listen to what God has to say to you. So let me first start with a few things. I hope that you can hear the music. Back there I have some great worship music that's playing to hopefully give us a good atmosphere of worship and of the Spirit of God being here with us, because that's what this is ultimately about. So maybe you saw on my Facebook page, and I also sent out some emails, and I also have on my Snapchat and different places an update. I wrote something about last night. You guys read that? I also had it on my email, as I said, that I sent out. So last night, I spent time with my friend Philip. So I don't know if you're on the chat here, Philip, but welcome if you are. And it was just amazing. I went to this church here in the area, here in Long Beach, called Favor Day, not flavor, favor as in the favor of God. Favor Day, my first time there, and it was a great experience. The guest speaker that was there, I think his name was Manny, he talked about his childhood, and it really connected with my own story, and I think it may connect with you. And the topic of this whole chat today is how can we renew our strength? Even though you might be someone who's been a church attender, you might be someone who, enjoys spiritual things, you are someone who's trying to honor God in your life, but you deal with some sort of trauma. And it's what I called either spiritual constipation, or the other one that I recently learned was spiritual bypass. And that might be a little better one. But both really are the same thing. And spiritual bypass, or spiritual constipation, as I call it, is this dichotomy between our beliefs that we hold on to so dearly and our bodies, especially when it comes to trauma. And what happens when we commit when we experience a spiritual bypass, or if I can even go as far as to call it a spiritual suicide, is that because we want to be faithful to our faith, then we hear a message or a pastor, or we read in the Bible that it says that we should not be anxious. And so we immediately ascend to that place that says, okay, I shouldn't be anxious. I shouldn't be afraid. The trauma of my childhood, it somehow needs to be okay. There needs to even be a positive reason for it. And so we try mentally to ascend to that place, but our trauma and our body is still dealing with the pain and the trauma of our childhood, of even something that may have happened recently in your life. And so what I love, though, about the scriptures is that I quoted this also on my email. Jesus talks about how he grew, or I mean, the author, the Gospels talk about how Jesus grew in both his wisdom, meaning his actual knowledge, his understanding, his body, his brain, his wisdom, as well as in his spirit. And I love that it says that he grew in that. Even though he was God and he is the only begotten Son of God, even Jesus himself had to go through a process of becoming stronger, of growing in wisdom, in stature, in spirit. And so imagine us. Imagine how much more do you and I need to grow in this case, in our understanding of trauma. And you may know my story, and I don't want to, at this point, get into it too long, but the brief of it is I grew up a very happy boy, filled with joy and laughter, and filled with music and church, and I always loved school as well. I loved getting good grades in school. My parents loved me. They were there for me, my sisters. It was a dream life that I was living until about age 9 or 10. I went through a very traumatic war. And it wasn't just the war itself, the bombs and the dead bodies and a lot of that trauma. But then I got separated from my parents. I moved to Long Beach, here where I live now, at about age 9, 10, 11, 12. It's kind of a process there. And then for the next 20 years, through my teen years and all those formative, very important times, I grew up without that guidance. My grandmother, who was amazing, she raised me. But, you know, no one can replace your mom and your dad. And so, and then not only that, but then I dealt with what I call compound interest or compound trauma. On top of that loneliness and that separation, then I dealt with the invisible immigrant syndrome, the IIS. I didn't have all my paperwork in place. And so for the next, 10, 15 years, I lived in fear of going back home where there was this war that was taking place, that I could die. And so I had this trauma upon this trauma. And then on top of that, I dealt with a third layer trauma, which was my grandma who was ill. So not only was I far from home, but the woman who was at that point my everything, she was aging and she dealt with illness, high blood pressure primarily. And I had to, at 15, younger even, 12, 13, 14, 15, through all of my teen years, balance all these things. And so what happened to my life? Well, I began to stuff everything. And I tell you that because you might identify with that stuffing that happens. And you begin to stack these trauma, these traumatic situations or traumatic circumstances, and you stuff them because you don't know what to do with them. Going back to this pastor from last night, he dealt with his trauma, which I don't know if I mentioned. His dad, he said, sat them down when he was 9, and his siblings. I think they were older than him, it seemed like it. And he told them that he was leaving his mom and his children. And so this young 9-year-old, this pastor now, he got into drugs at that young age. And then at 18, he tried to commit suicide. And that's when God got a hold of him. But that trauma, and he didn't share really about post-18, and I wish he had, because that's the spiritual suicide or the spiritual constipation or the spiritual bypass that we're often exposed to, is at 18, in terms of his life, and I don't think he did this intentionally, but that's just where he stopped the tape. We don't know what those 9 years, how that was resolved. I mean, when he came to faith, that was just the beginning of his journey towards health and wellness and vitality and what I call spiritual renewal or spiritual power. And so that's what I try to do, is to take it from there, basically, because I think all of us, you probably have a very similar experience. You have something in your life that you've dealt with, and whether it's Buddhism or Jesus or maybe agnosticism or church activity or churchianity, as I call it, maybe it's been more depression. It's been maybe more like this young man, drinking, alcohol, drugs, maybe pornography or anger. There are many ways that this trauma expresses itself. And maybe at some point you came to know who God is and you came to faith. So as I said, you committed spiritual suicide because now you're trying to balance these two things. And so how do you resolve your trauma in light of your faith? And that's what I want to talk to you about today. So the first principle that I think is very important that I want to write down here is the importance of knowing that you are loved. That's the first principle. That you are the beloved. This is the most powerful principle that you need to learn. Is this amazing knowledge that you, in your trauma, that you, in your circumstances, even in your hiding, the fact that you are maybe unintentionally hiding your fear from your parents or from your friends or probably from yourself, that regardless of how much hiding you've been going through, you've been doing, that you are still the beloved. Now, what does the beloved mean? There is a great book that I want to recommend to you by a man named Henry Nouwen. And it's called actually The Beloved. You can buy that at Amazon, wherever it may be. It's out of print, I believe, and he passed away 10 years ago or so. But he was one of my mentors, not personally, but I read everything on Henry Nouwen. I listened to a lot of his videos on YouTube. You can still go to YouTube and type his name and listen to some of his talks. He was a Catholic priest that had an amazing love for Jesus and an amazing understanding of pain. I don't want to get into his story, but he was a Harvard-educated professor that then spent the last years of his life working among the mentally disabled. I believe it was in New Zealand, I believe. I could be wrong on that. And so from that experience, he talks about being the beloved. Now, let me take you back to a passage I want to read. I'm going to get my Bible here. How's everybody doing, by the way? Let me go check the chat really quick, okay, to see how you're doing. So I'm going to put the microphone down here and see how everybody's doing, okay? Okay, great. Sorry about that if that's making noise in your ear there. Let me put this back on. Okay. So this idea of being the beloved is really the most powerful concept that will change you in terms of integrating your trauma and your faith and really understanding what this is all about. So I want to read to you out of Matthew chapter 3, where Jesus is baptized and where he hears from his Father. And you're going to notice, at least in my story, a lot of talk about my father, literally my dad. And I'm going to tell you more about my relationship with him and some of the things that I've learned in the last few years. And the reason I want to bring up the whole idea of a father is because you might be someone who has maybe some lost relationship with your dad. You might have some, whether it's conflict or maybe some pain associated with your dad. he might be alive. My father died 10 years ago, actually December 31st of 2000. So literally 15 years ago to the day almost. And so I'll tell you more about that. But this passage that I want to read to you and how you are the beloved was the key passage that transformed me in terms of connecting my anxiety, my fear, my insecurities with my faith. And so check this out. It says here in verse 15, but Jesus said it must be done, speaking of him being baptized, because we must do everything that is right. So then John baptized Jesus. So the story basically is Jesus is about to start his ministry here on earth. He's at the time maybe 30, maybe 31. And he knows that in order for him to have power, to have spiritual power, that he needs to be baptized. And we read this story mostly in terms of him being baptized as a symbol of the initiation of his ministry. But I am convinced that that was only part of the initiation or of his empowerment, that it was the voice from heaven that truly stamped his power. And here's what the voice said. After this baptism, as Jesus came up out of the water, the heavens were opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and settling on him. And a voice from heaven said, "This is my beloved Son, and I am fully pleased with him." I want to read that last verse again. It says, and a voice from heaven said, "This is my beloved Son, and I am fully pleased with him." That's the word right there. This is my beloved Son, and I am fully pleased with him. I can tell you so much about that power of that verse, but I'm going to instead tell you a story to maybe bring this down to just day-to-day life. As I mentioned, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story so you can hopefully connect my story to yours. So as I mentioned, I grew up a very happy boy. But then at about age 10 to 12, I was separated from my mom and dad. And in many ways, my mom is still alive, by the way, and I have a great relationship with her. But in many ways, I would say that my grandmother became my mom. And now my grandma's also gone, which was probably the second or maybe the first most painful thing I've been through besides my dad dying. But my point is that it was my dad and that relationship with him that got stuffed even further down in my heart. It was probably the thing that I ignored, or it wasn't an ignoring, it got stuffed, as I said, the most. So through those 20 years, since age 10, 11 till my 30s, when my dad finally died, he died when he was 57. So I think I did the math once, and it was about 20, 25 years after I was separated from him. During those 20 years, I was alone, but my dad wrote me letters. So every week, every month, sometimes every week, I would get letters from my dad. And I literally still have a stack, maybe 3-4 inches tall, of letters from my father, filled with love and guidance. And that, I would say, was about the only thing that really got me through those teenage years, where I had, like I told you, my stacking of my trauma. And so now fast forward all of that to about 5 years ago. So I'm maybe 40, 41, I'm 46 now. So we're talking 30 years later. I'm 40, 41, and I was going through a huge change in career, and my anxiety was going through the roof. I was just finishing 2 years of deep counseling, where I had learned so much about that trauma that I grew up with, and picked up amazing skills. I spent, as I've said many times, $10,000 and 10,000 hours with what felt like 10,000 counselors, but I think it was maybe 5 or 6. And that along with the grace of God and my family, my wife especially, that was my saving grace. That saved my life, literally. And so, but in all of that, every time I would go to therapy, especially this one gentleman that I had, his name is Jerry, who I love so much, he would ask me about my dad, and I would begin to, one of two things, shut down completely or cry uncontrollably. And so I hit my 40s, and if you are a male or even a female, you know that 40s and midlife is a big deal. I was without work. I was unemployed. We were putting about $2,000 on our credit card every month. We eventually got up to almost $20,000 in credit card debt. My wife would literally cry every weekend because of my job situation. I was trying everything. Nothing was working. And so my mom was here visiting because she came basically to help us, and in many ways to help me through that crisis. It's probably the lowest of the lows that I had experienced. No work, debt, my wife crying. I couldn't provide for my family. A family of 5, 3 growing children, a mortgage, living here in California, which is not cheap. So my mom was here, and I remember she was in the bathroom, literally right next door here to this room. And she was, I think, combing her hair. And so I went and closed the lid on the toilet, I made sure that I did that, and sat down and just began to cry. And I just began to ask my mom, Mom, who am I? I can't seem to do anything right. Who am I? What is my identity? What am I good at, basically? And I remember she stopped combing her hair and she looked at me, and my mom is a very compassionate woman. I love that she's a woman of joy, and she's also a strong person. She said to me, son, she said it in Spanish. Primero me dice, I'm going to do a little Spanish here that I'll translate. She said, primero, sos mi hijo. Y segundo me dice, sos hijo de Dios. So in Spanish, she said, first, you are my son. And second, you are a son of God. You're a child of God. And I can't even imagine or put into words the power of those words. Basically, she said, you are the beloved. It was that verse, but in real life, in the bathroom of my house here. That was the moment when I understood who I was in Christ, as we call it. Even though I had nothing going for me, I understood that the trauma of my life, the financial trauma of that time, of that season, was made well and whole in the love of my mom. And I love that it was a real person. You know, I didn't hear it from heaven. It wasn't a spiritual voice. It was a literal voice from my mom. And I want to go back to that. At the beginning, I talked about how we need to integrate our mind and our body with our spirit and not commit spiritual suicide or spiritual bypass or constipation. It was my mom who said that to me, a real life person who loves me. And my dad is gone, was gone. He died, as I said a while back. My grandmother was gone. My identity was gone. My financial powers were gone. All of that stuff at that moment had been stripped away. And yet God, in his infinite love, he used my mom and her words to tell me, not that God loves you. It wasn't just that, because see, I think for many of us, going back to spiritual suicide, we know that God loves us. That's not what's missing. I mean, it might be missing for some of you. But for those that know that, those of us that know that, what's missing is that my mom loves me, that my dad loves me. Maybe it's the opposite for you. Maybe you lost your mom. Maybe you lost your husband. And what you long to hear from, let's say, another man or from your child or from a friend is that they love you. Not that they are taking the place of your husband or the place of your dad. In my case, my mom obviously couldn't replace my father, but God used a human being. The power of relationship is huge to fill in that which was missing from my life. And that was the foundation to my spiritual power. The fact that I knew at that moment that I am the beloved. And notice the two parts of what she said. She said, first, you are my son. And that is so powerful because when you are in the middle of trauma, when you're far from home, maybe you're in the military. I was talking to my friend Philip. And when you're in the military, I have family that spent time in the military, in the Navy. And I grew up in Nicaragua, so I've dealt with a lot of war type stuff. I mean, even my own story, you're never home, except maybe when you're out with your Army friends or your Navy SEAL friends or whatever it may be. You're never really home. You deal with that invisible immigrant syndrome. And what the invisible immigrant syndrome has as a positive is that you're always comfortable, or that you're comfortable everywhere. You can easily fit in or absorb or connect or sense what others are feeling. Because when you grow up far from home, or where you don't know who your home or where your home is, then instinctively our bodies adapt. We can make a friend from a rock, as they say. Everyone's our friend. We have this amazing energy and genuine, intuitive connection with people. We are genuinely interested in others. And so empaths, falcons, compassionate types, INTJs, INFJs, if you're into the Myers-Briggs or different kind of ways to describe, indigos as they call them, all of us kind of 80s kids and maybe some millennials as well. I've met many millennials that are very compassionate as well. Millennials are people now in their 20s, maybe a little, early 30s. You understand what I'm talking about. You have this amazing, almost supernatural ability to connect. You're multisensory, as they call them. You have this intuitive antenna that is off the radar, off the charts. But the problem with that is that you never feel at home. And so when my mom, going back to my story, says to me, "You are my son," you know what I thought of? I thought of my last name, Trigueros. Because when you are an immigrant, an invisible immigrant, you might feel like an immigrant to your house, to your city, to your school, to your country, of course. And then you have this, whether you're a 1.5er or you're a 2 second generation or a third generation, you have these three dimensions to your invisibleness. You might be a first generation person, meaning, your parents grew up in Mexico or grew up in China or grew up in Argentina, or in my case in Nicaragua, and you also was born there, but you moved. That's what's called 1.5. Or you might be a second generation, third generation. But if you feel out of place just about anywhere, and yet you feel at home anywhere, you are suffering from the invisible immigrant syndrome. And so what the invisible immigrant syndrome needs is to know that they belong. That you are a Martinez, that you are a Chan, that you are a Robles, that your name is written in somebody's book. Isn't that awesome how even that connects to how God speaks about us, that we are written in his book of life. So all this is just common sense. And so when my mom says, "You are my son," I'm thinking, I am a Trigueros. And not only that, but I belong to Nicaragua. That's my homeland. That's why I'm the color that I am, and my facial features and the way I speak and my memories and my tattoos on my arms, they connect me to my country, to who I am, to my identity here on earth, which is of God. God created this earth. And then when she says, you are also a child of God, it completes it for me. It's like the 1-2 punch. So for you, what I want to ask you is a few things. As I'm going to wrap this up here, and I want to give you a few things, is what are you missing? Number 2 is, where is home for you? And then 3rd is, what is your name? Okay. So those are my 3 questions, is what are you missing? What is your home, or where is your home? And then lastly, what is your name? Basically, we're talking about location, about place, and about name. So we're talking about the things that ground us as humans. And, I was talking to a new friend, as I mentioned, Phil, and his girlfriend. Maybe you guys are on today, or maybe later today. Romina, I believe is her name. And I just met her last night, but she was just telling me how she's lived in the country for 5 years here in the U.S. She's from Argentina. I don't know her story at all. We just briefly met last night. But it reminded me of how many people feel how many people deal with this idea of an invisible immigrant. Now, she, just from what I could tell, she connects with people so easily. She is a creative. I think she's a singer and musician. She comes from a very Christian-based family. So she's a young woman who has a lot going for her. But I could also tell, just briefly, that there is this kind of a disconnection of where do I belong. And the reason, I don't really know her story. I'm just connecting things to a little bit of what I know about that. But where I'm going with that is that many times you might feel very comfortable, and you might even consider yourself a very happy person. I was, and I still am, a very happy guy. And you know what? Let me tell you something. That is the true you. If you are a person of gozo, as I call it, of joy, remember that you're not going crazy. That even though you might think like you're losing your mind, that you are depressed, crying all the time, that you are anxious and you're having panic attacks, and you don't know why this is happening to you, remember that your true identity is joy. That is why I talk about joy and gozo all the time, because there are many reasons, but mostly because that is our true identity. We are meant to be people of love, joy, and peace. But to me, joy, and I've studied so much on this word joy is the attack. It's a weapon of attack. Love, obviously, it's not a weapon. Love is an action. Love is a almost like the air we breathe. And peace is also, I think, it's also a source of strength as well, I'm convinced. But joy, I heard it said that joy is resistance against the forces of despair. That's why Psalm 30 says that though there's pain in the night, gozo comes in the morning. So that's why, going back to being an invisible immigrant, your true identity is joy. What's missing is you understanding that you are the beloved, that you're loved by God. What's missing is you having the knowledge of what your trauma was really all about. What's missing is you knowing that you are loved by God, even in your crisis. In fact, you will never find the healing and the true gozo that you long for until you let God touch that trauma. Touch your body, touch your physical brain matter, your brain. Because trauma, and I will talk about this in other chats and other casts and other live talks, your brain is literally doing things, responding to trauma primarily, And that's why you have the panic attack or the depression or the uncontrollable tears. But just to land on this, what are you missing? In other words, are you missing love? Are you missing joy? Are you missing people? You can maybe even summarize it as my mom gave me those two things. She said, you are first my son. Are you missing identity here on earth? Or are you missing your identity in heaven? Number two is, where is home? It's so powerful to think of where is home. For many people, home is within us. I think for all of us that are immigrants, second, third, fourth generations, I'm a 1.5, as I said, home is in you. Home is where the heart is, they say. I'm at home here, literally in my house. I'm at home at church. I'm at home at Long Beach State. I'm at home at Fuller Seminary. I'm at home at Starbucks. I'm at home anywhere. But the problem with that is that many times that's a defense mechanism, because my true home no longer exists. It was taken away from me. I was robbed of it. It was destroyed. And so to cope with that trauma or that despair, again, joy is a weapon against the forces of despair. That despair is the fact that my home no longer is. So for me, my dad is gone. That cuna, meaning that crib where I was born, that embryonic, almost like the belly of a mom, where the embryo is born. That's gone. That baby that needs a place to grow, it's gone. Some have it. Some never lost it. My wife never lost that. My children, by the grace of God, they've had that place of birth and of life. They never lost it. But many of us lost that at some point along the way. So where is your home? And then lastly, what is your name? And obviously we all have a name. Mike and Joe and Peter and whatever your name is. Rebecca and Michelle. So we all have a name, but what I'm getting at is your name beloved? Or do you call yourself depressed? Do you call yourself lonely? Do you call yourself, I'm far from home? What do you call yourself? Not in public, not when you're out at a party or you're at the mall or you're online, or not that name where we put our best foot forward. But I'm talking about when you're desperate. What do you call yourself? Do you call yourself broken, depressed? Do you call yourself crazy? I have so many people that they call me, they say, Trig, I think I'm going crazy. Or they tell me, I don't want to go crazy. And the reason why it's important that you know your name is because here's your name. You know what your name is? That's why I started with this. This is your name. This is your name. Is you are beloved. That means you're loved. You're loved by God, and you're loved by life, by someone, by your daughter, by your mother, by your father. And so here's a quick to-do list here as I go, is I want you to think about over the next 3-4 days about what is it that you need the most. Is it God? Is that what's missing? Or is it people and a person specifically? So let me start with God. If God is what you're missing, then I want to give you something to do. I want you to read through this chapter of Matthew chapter 3 and to just read the story of how Jesus, after he was born, we just did, Christmas, how he began to look for people that were lost. And maybe you need to come to a place where you say, God, I need you in my life. I have friends, I have purpose, I have a nice car. I have a pretty good relationship. I'm doing fairly well. But what's missing is my eternal purpose. So that's what you might need to do. Now, the second part is you might need to know that you're loved by people. And now I know that you feel loved by your mom, your dad, your children, your roommate, your friends. So before you go there though, that's why I ask yourself, what are you missing? Ask yourself, who do I need love from? In my case, what I needed to know, and I didn't get it, is that my dad loved me. What I was missing, and I still am, and I'm still in recovery, I'm still in progress, and if anything, as I mentioned in my Facebook post, I feel like God is taking me deeper so that my spiritual power will be truly from God and life mixed together, not from just my head or from my wit or from my knowledge or from education or whatever. But for me, what I wanted to hear is from my dad to tell me, son, I love you. And even more than I love you is for him to tell me that I am amazing at whatever he saw in me. It's basically what God the Father told God the Son is, hey everybody, look at my son. He is awesome. Not only is he awesome, but I am so happy with who he is. You see the power of that? And so I want you to ask yourself, who did I not get that from? Now, if that person is no longer here, if it's your husband who you long to hear from and he's deceased or he left, if it's your mom or your father, if it's your friends, if it's the child you, as I call it, the inner child, if it's that child that you want to know loves you, meaning that loves who you are and who you were, then I want you to do some work on that and think about who can then give me that. First, of course, God, but besides God or next to God or God in human form, let me put it that way. Who do I need to hear that from? Of course, Jesus. So you know what I'm saying, is someone else in your life. Is there a mentor? Is there a grandmother? In my case, it was my mom. My mom couldn't speak for my dad, but in that moment, the bathroom story that I told you, in many ways, my mom spoke on behalf of my deceased dad. And how do I know that? Because it touched that emptiness in me. It touched that great need in me. So I want to wrap this up just by blessing you. I hope this has served you well. I hope this has helped you to at least begin the process. We are just scratching the surface of how to renew your power, but I hope that this conversation on being the beloved has given you at least a glimpse. And I wanted to start with basically the good wine first, as they say, because I have 5 points that you need in order to integrate and renew your power. But I wanted to start with the best one, which is to know that you're the beloved. Now, what I want to do now is to invite you. One of the things that I am interested in looking into and inviting you into is to come to my house if you're in the Long Beach, LA, Orange County, Santa Ana area, Anaheim, LA area. And there'll be details on this invitation on my website at lifeofgoso.com where you're seeing this, or on Facebook as well, wherever you're watching this YouTube. But on, I think it's January the 16th. So basically in 2 weekends, I am going to host a live in-home Renew Your Power seminar where you can come here to my house and we'll have some drinks and some snacks and some music and meet and greet. And I'm going to go through these things live. And most of all, which is what's missing here, is interact with your story. And I actually want to help you begin or further your process of healing to become the beloved and to renew your spiritual power. So let me get this date. So yesterday was the 3rd, so 10th, 17th. So yeah, it's January the 16th. I want you to sign up at my website at lifeofgoso.com/renew your power, right where you saw this link. You can also go to davidTrig.com or on Facebook. You'll see all the stuff everywhere. Snapchat, Twitter, Instagram. And to sign up and come to my house so we can do this live. And we're going to host 10 people. I think any more than that. And it's not so much that it gets crowded, but then you might not get as much out of it. But if we get 25 to sign up, great. If we get 2, then that's awesome too. Daisy the dog is back there and she's going to enjoy and love you and lick you to death. So I want you to do that. And then I want you to also just begin to look into this year and to consider all the different things, to pray for me. I have about 3 or 4 different things that I'm going to be doing, including a live conference, including some video courses, including, as I said, these home events, and a couple other things, including an audio series that is going to be called 40 Days of Gozo, where you can download this resource that will help you basically stay connected to this message for 40 days. I also have a couple of ebooks that go along with that as resources. So thank you for watching. I hope that everything worked out technically, that you could hear me fine. Again, if you're on the replay, welcome. Thanks so much for checking this out. So glad. I am still working on my email responses and all those things that are going out to you when you sign up for things. So hopefully the dates, I think the date on this one was wrong. It said last Thursday, but the link was good. So hopefully you were able to watch this. And thank you again. Make sure to go to lifeofgoso.com/renew your power to sign up for the live in-house event that I'm going to host here in a few weeks. And it's just a test. Again, if nobody signs up, if it's just not the right time, then that's fine. We'll wait. But I want to at least put it out there as a fleece before God, so that you can consider that and begin to plan for it. We'll also live stream it so that even if you can't be here, you can still watch it. But I think the power of it, and my intent, is to actually have you here in studio in my house so that we can interact, and hopefully I can be a part of your healing, and God can use me and each other to find healing and to know that you're the beloved, so that you can have that spiritual power in 2016 to support and to sustain your business, career, education goals. If you want to start a new business, or if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a church leader, if you're a pastor, if you're a nonprofit leader, if you're a volunteer, if you're a teacher, an educator, someone committed to giving, if you're in production or in entertainment, if you're someone who loves to give, if you're a high achiever, a high performance individual, my desire, because I consider myself one of you, is to bring that foundation, that spiritual power, because I need it, because I want to be a man not of the flesh, but of the spirit, and I want you to do the same. Thanks again, and I will see you next time.